The moment that changed everything didn't arrive with shouting, accusations, or drama. It came quietly, like a gentle tap on the shoulder you don't notice until it's already changed the direction of your day. It was an ordinary afternoon in Ohio, the kind of day that feels forgettable until it suddenly isn't. I had gone back to my ex-girlfriend's house for one simple reason, to return a box of mail that had somehow followed me through 2 moves and several years of silence. I told myself it was just a courtesy. Nothing emotional, nothing symbolic, just the right thing to do. But when the door opened, it wasn't my ex standing there. It was her mother. Margaret Collins looked at me the way someone looks at a photograph they weren't expecting to find again. Her hair had more gray than I remembered, and her shoulders seemed slightly curved inward, as if grief had slowly taught her to protect her heart. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air felt heavier than it should have, thick with memories neither of us had invited back. We exchanged polite words, safe words, the kind people use when they are trying not to open doors they've already closed. Then she hesitated, and that's when she asked it. Would you mind if we went someplace alone for a minute? The question wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but my chest tightened instantly before my mind could even catch up. Something about the way she asked told me this wasn't casual. This wasn't small talk. This was the past asking to be heard. I denied the request gently. No anger, no raised voice, just a quiet, respectful no. She nodded, understanding more than I said out loud. I handed her the box, exchanged one last polite goodbye, and walked back to my car. But the moment didn't end there. It followed me. The refusal echoed in my head all the way home, because I knew, deep down, that I had just avoided something that would have forced me to confront wounds I'd spent years pretending were healed. My name is Aaron Whitmore, and for a long time, I believed my life was defined by what I had lost. I grew up in a small Midwestern town where people still wave from their porches and church bells mattered. I met my ex, Rachel Collins, when we were both trying to escape that smallness while secretly fearing the loneliness beyond it. From the outside, we looked solid, stable, like the kind of couple people expected to last. But inside, we were breaking quietly. We didn't know how to talk about pain, about expectations, about the pressure of becoming adults before we were ready. When it ended, it didn't end with closure. It ended with silence, unanswered messages, distance, and with a quiet belief that I hadn't just failed her, I had failed her entire family. Margaret had always been kind to me, warm, steady, the kind of person who made you feel welcome without asking for anything in return. After the breakup, I disappeared. I thought distance was the only way to survive. I didn't know then that distance doesn't erase pain. It just teaches it how to wait. Years passed. I moved to Columbus, took a job that paid the bills but never quite touched the soul. I convinced myself that moving on meant forgetting, but some things don't fade just because you stop looking at them. When I heard that Rachel's father had passed away suddenly, the news reached me through a mutual friend. I sat with that information for months, guilt settling into my bones. I didn't know if reaching out would bring comfort or reopen wounds that were better left alone. So I chose the safest option, returning the mail. That's a lie I told myself. Anyway, seeing Margaret again unraveled it instantly. Grief had changed her, not dramatically, but deeply, as if loss had folded her inward, making her smaller in a way that had nothing to do with age. When she asked to speak alone, my mind raced through possibilities I didn't want to entertain. Not scandal, not temptation, something heavier, crossing a line. I had spent years rebuilding my sense of integrity, learning boundaries I hadn't always respected in my younger days. I knew that some lines, once crossed, can never truly be uncrossed. So I said no. And still, the questions came. Why had she asked? What pain was she carrying that made her reach for me? For days afterward, memories resurfaced. Thanksgiving dinners. Margaret defending me when Rachel and I fought. Moments where she treated me like family, not obligation. I realized something important. My denial wasn't a rejection of her humanity. It was protection for both of us. Still, the ache remained. I started volunteering at a local food pantry, trying to ground myself in service, hoping that helping strangers would quiet the noise inside. Instead, it sharpened my awareness of how many people carry grief without ever saying a word. Then, A week later, I receive a letter. Handwritten, careful, from Margaret. She wrote about loneliness, about how the house had become an echo chamber after her husband's death and her daughter's move across the country. She explained that asking to be alone hadn't been about anything inappropriate. It had been about wanting to speak freely, without reopening family wounds. She respected my decision, and she apologized. As I read her words, something inside me loosened. The world wasn't asking me to betray my values. It was asking me to live them fully. I wrote back, suggesting we meet somewhere public, neutral, a small cafe near the river where sunlight and people could keep everything honest. She agreed. When we met at the cafe, there was no tension, only calm. We talked about life without digging up the past in ways that could hurt. About faith, about loss, about how love sometimes looks like letting go instead of holding on. There was no drama, no secrets, just two people acknowledging pain and choosing grace. That conversation didn't erase the past, but it reframed it. I learned something powerful that day. Denying a moment doesn't mean denying compassion. Sometimes it means redirecting it into something healthier. Slowly, my life began to shift. I started opening up at work, building real friendships instead of hiding behind productivity. I returned to church, not out of obligation, but out of hunger for community. I even forgave myself for mistakes I'd carried like a sentence for years. Margaret and I exchanged occasional holiday cards. Nothing more, nothing less. A connection kept clean by boundaries and respect. What surprised me most was how inspired I felt by a single act of saying no. In a culture that often equates goodness with compliance, I learned that true kindness sometimes requires restraint. Boundaries aren't walls. They are bridges, structures that keep relationships from collapsing under their own weight. That quiet refusal in an Ohio driveway didn't close a door. It opened a better one. And when I look back now, I don't feel regret. I feel gratitude for the strength to pause, for the wisdom to choose integrity over impulse, and for the reminder that healing doesn't always come from saying yes. Sometimes it comes from a quiet no, offered with empathy, that leads to something far better later on.